We are back with another Rock and a Hard Place. Today is on stress and wellness. So here we go. This will be cut up again into short clips. Um, Sometimes when questions will pop up, it'll get you to kind of start your own thought process, and then we'll talk about it more in depth after the questions. So I'm going to ask Dr. Koberstein, what primarily, how do you want to define stress?
I mean, there's a few different ways to look at it, and to look at what we mean by the term stress. Typically, when we talk about stress, we're using, more of a response-based definition, meaning that our stress is occurring because of different demands that exist within our environment, and things such as that. The other way to conceptualize stress is to think about, the more stimulus-based approach of kind of a stimulus threshold. When your body becomes stimulated to a certain degree, your system kicks in cortisol, which then gets sent out to help reduce inflammation that's found within your body. Right? And so those are the two different ways that we kind of define stress.
And I want to kind of touch on this like cognitive appraisal map, and they'll see it in the textbook. But I want to talk about this idea of what's the difference between a threat and a challenge.
Well, I mean, it has to do with kind of cost benefit, right?
Yeah.
A threat is something that you perceive as having a negative consequence. It's important that we use that word perceive in there, because this is what it comes down to, especially when we're talking anxiety, risk, thing like that. But
It's definitely not universal.
no,
Oh.
a challenge is somewhere where you can gain growth or potential. A threat is somewhere where it may lead to harm, loss, basically, or you don't believe it to have an outcome. So to give you like a solid example for application, um, a really smart student texted me today saying, I'm working on this content paper and I can't find any sources. And I said, all right, so like you're looking for sources that say exactly what you want to be looking at. Well, yes, that's what she says. And I go, well, no, like you got to step out and do this. That's the challenge. But there's a perceived risk there, right? And her perception of that risk is threatening because it threatens to like expose her as an imposter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what should be a challenge for her to use her own words, her own thoughts, her own knowledge, and then support herself, is instead viewed as a threat because she's unsure whether she'll be able to do it. So that's how we look at threats and challenges in two different ways.
And there's also this type of good stress, right? Is like we need stress in our lives. We need a considerable amount of stress in our lives. And the stress is called eustress. Say it right, right?
You stress, I stress, we all stress,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, well, eustress versus distress,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, you know, Sometimes stress is our most positive motivator, right? Any athlete can tell you at some time in their athletic career, whether you were, young or old, that there's that like click there where, the stress of the game takes hold of you and you just kind of zone out and go.
Mm-hmm.
There's that breaking point for procrastinators out there where your stress must motivate you or you fail. That's different than distress, though, and it has to do with what your kind of optimal level of functioning is, where kind of what we would say the median level of stress you're able to properly function at,
Mm-hmm.
rests. Anywhere beyond that threshold, and you start seeing decline. You're not able to perform quite as much.
I always bring up this example about Olympic athletes and the difference between Olympic athletes and amateurs. And yeah, the Olympic athletes would almost trick their mind into believing that their nervousness was excitement. And so when you see their interviews and you say, were you nervous like 20 meters up in the air, like getting ready to dive? Like, no, I was excited. I was excited. It was an exciting moment. It's not necessarily just their difference of perception.
So to bring that back to cognitive appraisals, that's what we call a cognitive reframe.
Yeah.
Right? We're taking the stimulation we're feeling and we're reframing it to be something that is perceived as less threatening. Therein, we can start to be challenged by it rather than be worked into that kind of distressed frame, right?
I mean, the model that we talked about and relate last year a lot was the success seeking compared to the failure avoiding.
Yep.
That's another reframe. So let's talk a little bit about stress among demographic groups. And is there an actual difference between academic or demographic groups of stress?
I mean, there's minor differences in what we see between levels, but overall, the plots themselves tend to be parallel. So what that means basically is that we have a trend towards positivity, but whether or not there's a statistical difference between the levels is still kind of to be seen, right? What we do know is that generally stress levels have seen increase in certain groups. Most of all, looking at educational levels. If you look at the charts, the book, people with less education tend to find higher stress and are getting more stressed. If you pair that then looking at things like employment and income, what you start to see is more of a secular trend where people are becoming more stressed because of the level of education needed in order to gain employment, in order to gain income. And you can see that
in life satisfaction.
Yeah, that's big life satisfaction right there, right?
That's the meta.
And even when we get back into like Maslow's work that we talked about last week, we're talking about safety, security there. So those are some of the things that are going to big time cause stress because they're so important to all that higher level functioning you see.
Now, way back in biopsychology, we talked about the fight or flight response, and this was with the early contribution of Walter Cannon. What were some of the other contributions later on? We're talking about Hans Selye, if I can say his name correctly, and his 3 stages. Do you want to touch on those?
Yeah, I mean, basically we're talking about alarm, resistance, exhaustion right there. And so what we're talking about is whether or not our body can actually respond prior to basically exhausting itself and starting to see detriment, right? The first one's that alarm, heart beating, palpitations, right? All of that. All those physical reactions that are kind of giving us adrenaline to react. Then once we have that reaction, we start to adapt to all of those things that are sent out, right? Adrenal function, cortical function, and all of those things. And so we start to lower the intensity that's there, and we start to kind of see those physiological reactions diminish. Now, the problem with that is that what we're seeing here is that prolonged stress actually starts to have a habituation effect in which the adrenal function and the cortical function as a result start to lessen the amount that is secreted. Now, that is really important because what stress does in the body is it acts as inflammation, like straight inflammation, like Advil reducing inflammation, like a bruise, but inside of you. If we can't lessen that inflammation, we get into that third stage of exhaustion. We're no longer able to adapt to the stressor because physiological response. We lack the psychosocial emotional response. And so the body's tissues start taking heat from all of this, garbage that's being sent through our system to try to make an adaptation. So we see things like heart disease, heart attacks, right, strokes, all of those start to really become more prevalent.
And I think if I remember correctly, from psychomotivation, that these stages can also be seen. Well, if the graph is using time, but alarm reaction is usually something that's more immediate or short term. And then the stage of resistance is, okay, now I need to adapt. So maybe this is over a week long, or if it's like a crappy relationship and like, okay, like this is bugging me, I need to fix this. Or like the stage of exhaustion is that period of months or years, when like a job is completely wearing down on you. Then exactly what you just said, stroke, risk for stroke or cardiac disease, and several other things.
Yeah. And I mean, cortisol is basically our stress hormone that kind of helps us when we're in those elevated states of stress. However, it also weakens our immune system as a result of it being released. So it is a temporary function in order to reduce inflammation. People may have heard cortisol before because of the widespread use of cortisol releases or injections to help joint pain, right? What most people don't know is that the outcome of those types of injections is scar tissue. That's the same thing that's happening from that weakened immunoresponse, just in different ways because it's different parts of the body. So it's really, really important that we, monitor our stress and utilize good coping mechanisms, right?
What let's get into the type A and type B personalities. I'm sure this will be clipped into the next video. But Friedman and Rosman in 1974, as the textbook points out, discovered the people who are prone to heart disease tend to think and feel and act differently to those who are not. And so this was like somewhat of a correlation that they found. So they determined that there was two types, essentially. And they can be broken down into other types as well. Same with the big five personalities. They can be broken down into different facets. Let's touch on the type A and type Bs.
So, your type is like your rigid personality type, impatient, very, very driven by their need for organization and almost in a way dominance over their lifestyle, right? Now, that's the extreme end. But what you're seeing here is somebody who generally has kind of I'd call it environmental hostility. Their environment is asking for change with them. They're trying to overpower the environment in order to create stability for themselves, stasis. And the funny thing is that type A personalities usually get the nod over type B personalities, when type B personalities tend to be much, much healthier in regard to stress.
Yeah.
That go with the flow, laid back, it'll work out, man. You want to,
dude.
you want to play some ultimate in the field. No, but stereotypes aside, right? The type B person understands flow a little bit better, and flow is a really important thing for stress.
Yeah.
And
what is flow typically?
So usually when we're talking about flow, we're talking a little bit about our perception of control, how much control we have around an area or in a specific area. It talks about how much we kind of sit in an experience, right? I talk a lot about cognitive comfort. And cognitive comfort is an offshoot of this work on flow. Where we have to sit in an experience in order to gather up enough information to understand exactly what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean that flow doesn't have a knee-jerk reaction, but what we do is we don't allow that reaction to manifest into particular behaviors until we have more information, right? So it almost is this kind of manifestation of kind of lack of control, but a hyper focus on what's going on. Usually we talk about flow when we talk about leisure activities, but the reality is that flow has to do not necessarily with just leisure, but the availability of leisure as we do.
Yeah.
The understanding that almost everything has a key role in our happiness and what we're doing. And so people who are type B tend to be able to sit in those kind of cognitive vexes a little bit longer because they understand their lack of control and they just sit and try to take it in.
It's interesting, like one of the like hallmark examples is like the New England Patriots comeback, like for the, I think it was the Super Bowl, pretty sure it was, yeah.
Against the Falcons.
Against
the Falcons.
Yeah, against the Falcons. And
21-6.
That's like, I mean, that example is in like multiple TED Talks, just having that flow state. And like the Mind Valley Corporation that like I'm interested in out of Malaysia is all about getting into a flow state. They use it as a neural background. They kind of talk about that, getting into a beta wave. So that's really interesting stuff. Let's touch a little bit on the coping mechanisms. We talked about that a couple of minutes ago, but let's really break down what are the good coping mechanisms, what are the bad, what are the specific needs of each coping mechanism, because there's different types. There's like a problem-focused coping, like I have a problem, like I don't know what to do here. How do I cope with this problem? And then there's like emotion coping. If there's like I guess like if you're avoiding or distancing yourself emotionally from somebody.
Anxiety generally.
Yeah.
Depends what the source of your anxiety is with that coping and that stress. I mean, stress is an anxiety of sorts, right? An overwhelmment. So problem-based coping has to do with being able to see a problem. If you don't see a problem-focused coping is not going to work for you, right? So be wary of using problem-focused coping when you're the problem, right?
Yeah.
And beware of using emotional-focused coping when, again, there's a problem in the way you're acting, right? So again, it comes down to your perception of it. Typically, I find that most people underuse problem-focused coping. The problem-focused coping is just that we need to manage or alter our viewpoint or what is happening in our experience of stress around that problem, right? So like you're failing class, you have a test coming up, right? So what do you need to do? You need to break down, organize yourself to study. You need to reach out and gain help where you can, or you need to collaborate in order to kind of triangulate the amount of work that is necessary in order for you to kind of gain the requisite level of kind of functioning that's required for an exam, right? That's problem focused. It's really, really proactive. It works really well. However, the stressor has to be controllable. Emotional focused coping has to do with the negative emotions that you feel that are generally associated with the stress. So like here we're looking at not the problem, but the outcome, the manifestation of your emotion, your negative emotions there. In which case, what you really need to do is distract yourself from the negative emotions, right? The problem we have often
is not displace yourself from the negative emotion, but distract.
Correct.
Because if you're just, and this is about like the whole spanking thing, if you're just like trying to punish the thought, like the thought is just ringing. Like think of an elephant. Boom. All right, I'm thinking of an elephant. Don't think of an elephant. Oh, I'm thinking of an elephant, so it doesn't matter. So you need to distract yourself. You
Yeah,
need
right.
to kind of replace the habit.
Yep, it's the old one, two kids are stuck in the tree, right? What do? One mom yells up to the kid, "Don't let go." And that kid's sitting there going, "Don't let go. Don't let go. Don't let go. Don't let go." And the other parent's like, "Hold on as tight as you can." The first kid's about to die. All they're hearing is let go, let go, let go. Don't sit there, but the let go, let go, let go is the behavior. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
the kid hold on tight, that kid's just picturing themselves holding on as tight as they can.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about don't let go, thinking about what would happen if you let go, right? The only way is to distract fully from that. Now, here's the thing, emotional focus coping really only works if it's in service of finding a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And exploring the problem to make a change. So it's important. Emotional focus coping is really, really important for perception of problems that aren't real. So anxieties. Sometimes I have like wicked anxiety attacks, and all I have to do is take my mind off of it. Like I literally got like stuck in. My wife always calls it getting stuck in a rut.
Mm-hmm.
I get malignant thought in my mind, and it just carries itself away. It's a band of army ants carrying its dinner down a hole. And
Yeah.
I just go. And my heart is racing and I'm like scared. And she's like, "Will you just watch something different on TV, please? Like, can you just stop tweaking out? Just distract yourself from this for a moment."
Yeah.
And so that usually works. Whereas if I have a lot of work to do, I'm gonna find myself in a similar situation and have to calm myself down, but only in order to be able to motivate myself to work.
Yeah. Now we're gonna move to more positive psych stuff. We're gonna move to happiness,
Woohoo!
and yeah, we're gonna end on a
Is
good note.
this where, uh, because I'm happy starts playing in the background?
Yeah, that's terrible. We're
It's,
not gonna edit that.
yeah, it's a terrible song. It's an earworm. Everybody now is thinking it in the back of their mind, and they're not going to be able to get rid of it, right? Clap along if you feel. No.
No, no. So I know a lot of people are say, like be happy, or like, the goal in life is to be happy.
Ugh. Toxic positivity, man.
That's just fake and it bears no ground.
It's
Um,
toxic, man. It's toxic positivity. You know, it's not good for you to just think about happy things. You got problems you need to solve. Uh,
it's like well, like there's statements that are made where it's like, you're okay the way you are. It's like, well, you could always be better. So that bears construct. But let's talk about the elements of happiness real quick. Let's just touch on that diagram. So, like, and this is a lot of Seligman's work, which I'm pumped about. But there's different types of meaning, I guess. There's different types of life. How could I say this? Elements that make up happiness. I guess that's a good way to word it. So, like, there's the,
Purpose, enjoyment.
yeah,
You can spin it with any synonyms you want, right?
yeah.
But purpose, meaning, and enjoyment, right? You have to be able to use what you have
Mm-hmm.
and feel like you are an element of life,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to use that purpose to better others,
Yep.
right? Contribute back to the life you live, and you have to enjoy that
Yeah.
and enjoy even the monotony of that, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and that's how to be happy. Happiness rests in the middle, right?
Yeah. That kind of it sounds so simple, yet it is incredibly hard to do.
So I think a lot of us get the enjoyable part good.
Mm-hmm.
Miss is the purpose and meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or at least having those two things be aligned.
Well, because it seems I know this is a diagram. I know this is like a Venn diagram, but it almost seems like like a pyramid, almost like a stepping stone. Like you need one for the other, and you need the two others for the third. It's almost like this hierarchy. Um, because yeah, the enjoyment throughout daily pleasures is like, okay, like that can happen. But if you don't have the enjoyment, then how can you like use that purpose like well? If you don't really enjoy it, how can you consistently do that over a long period of time? And then if you can't do it over a long period of time, then how are you going to contribute to the greater good?
And I think sometimes we mistake something like enjoyment for contentment. What we're looking for enjoyment is just mere contentment, right? Like, it's been raining here for the past few days. The sun's out now, but like, I don't know. There's something about going out on a misty day and just breathing in kind of the cold, damp air, right? I know you were hunting
Hmm.
yesterday, and I was outside doing yard work, and like that's not a day where you're like, yes, but like you're out there and you're just like, all right, like it's a day.
Yeah.
It starts, it ends, it's a day, and I'm contented with it. It didn't need to be anything big. Sometimes we seek huge days.
Yeah, like life events, right?
Yeah.
And this is like
It,
a great segue into life events.
yeah, because we focus on turning points, right?
Yeah.
And we have to be careful about that. Those things, right? Those are the flash bulbs. They're big in our memory because they have so much sensory information. But we have to be careful, right? TLC put it best: "Don't go chasing waterfalls."
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep throwing these pop music signals in here, right? But what they mean by "don't go chasing waterfalls" is like you have to be careful about looking for the next biggest and best thing always.
Hmm.
It's one thing to challenge you, it's another thing to not understand the challenge in front of you and gain everything you can. You and I talk about this with people a lot. Like, you have to be vested in what you were doing. You can't allow yourself to not gain.
Hmm.
And that comes from everything, right? Those 7 principles, or 7 questions to find your purpose that we use from Mark Manson's site. You know,
Hmm.
always remind me of that contentment and how that's important, right? What's your favorite flavor of shit sandwich, and does it come with a pickle or an olive or
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
is, right?
For
Like,
me, it's a pickle. I'd rather have an olive than a pickle. But
yeah, I like the pickle. I love pickles. Those are, yeah, that's good. I'll eat an olive too, frankly. Too. I'm good. I'm not picky, man.
yeah. All right. Well, lastly, I just want to talk about positive affect and this pleasurable engagement with the environment. So we've talked about happiness, and that was more internal, I guess, in application as well. Um, but let's talk about positive affect or affect for a moment.
So the term affect, whenever you see an A, especially when we use it,
Yeah, yeah. Because sometimes, like, I used to not even know effect and affect. Like, what's the difference?
my whole first semester of grad school, I'm in all of these classes on emotion, and I'm reading affect and affect and affect, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't know what the frick this means.
Hmm.
Like, I'm not getting. And finally, when I figured out that it was talking about emotion, um, that that kind of released me from that. Anytime we use the term affect, we're talking about emotion, how we're dialed in, where on the scale we are in affect. And so when we talk about positive affect, we're talking about engaging with the positive outcomes in our environment and not engaging in the negative ones so much, or finding a silver lining in them,
Hmm.
right? Being able to laugh through your mistakes, being able to make fun of yourself is a way to have positive affect,
That's
right?
that Mark Manson. How can you best embarrass yourself?
Yeah, we'll come back to that. If nobody's gone to Mark Manson's website, you should go to Mark Manson's website and poke around a little bit. The guy is really clever when it comes to creating analogies,
Hmm.
to look at life in a different frame. You know, he he has a his last book, I believe, was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Um,
Yes, yes, it was. Yes, it was. Yes,
yeah,
I had a friend who
it
read
was a
it.
bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, I think.
Yeah.
You know, just good stuff, good reads, fun stuff that you know, will build your spirits a little bit and isn't a textbook. But going back to what we were getting at, yeah. So that's what we take out of the environment, this positive affect, right? Um, then we have optimism, which is the tendency to believe things are working, right? To view things as difficulties, challenges, steps, right? And engage in things as a purpose in life,
Yeah.
right? And that optimism is a cultivation,
And
right?
it's interesting that like this optimism like has like this like religious underpinning. Like it used to be a religious underpinning, and now we've like brought evidence to it. And I've always found that interesting because like it was like, you know, like Freud and Carl Jung, like that was a lot of religious symbolism for optimism. It was like faith in goodwill, like
Yeah.
faith that good will be good. Um, that's always been interesting because that religious underpinning was like a, I guess like a rubric, and then we actually backed that by evidence, non-religiously. That's always interesting.
Well, yeah, you know, hope.
Yeah.
I talk about this whenever we get into human development. You know, hope is the first ego quality that we have the chance of gaining in Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. And it's the one that permeates us the most through life, to trust our environment and those around us, to
Hmm.
becoming in good kind of meaning, for good reason. That's an important one. And hope allows us to have all sorts of things.
So, yet again, we are finishing another rock and a hard place. I am John Salati.
And I'm Dr. Coverstein.
We'll see you guys later.